Good evening. My name is Tony Clark. I'm a proud member of the My Brothers Keepers Task Force. I'm excited to be here this evening. This evening, we will discuss education disparities in Cambridge and where do we go and to address them? How do we address these, unfortunately, lingering things that have kind of plagued our community for many, many years? So I'm excited to have with us an esteemed panel, along with the Cambridge Community Foundation, which will help us contextualize a number of the issues that not only plague our community in this particular moment, but if we don't right them, will continue to plague us in the future. We're going to begin with a short video to provide context for tonight's conversation.
The Cambridge Community Foundation recently released their Equity and Innovation Report. This research report is a comprehensive look at all things Cambridge, with a concentration on how innovation has or has not impacted the areas of housing, incomes, ethnicities, ideas, and much, much more. Tonight on The Public Square, we're going to take a deeper dive into the intersection of innovation and the educational achievement gap for Black and Brown students in the Cambridge Public Schools.
Educational inequality is probably more than anything else the fundamental root of broader inequality. If we look at inequality in access to particular careers, inequality in income and wealth, inequality in the nature of political participation, all those things are mitigated by equalizing the skills that education produces, not only the academic skills, but the dispositions, the frames of minds, the conscientiousness, the diligence, the sense of agency. And so I think there is nothing more important we could do to produce the type of society we want than to raise outcomes in the field of education so that knowing somebody's race or ethnicity tells you nothing at all about what their test scores or grades or occupation might be.
We know the story. We've read the statistics. But Cambridge, one of the world's leading academic and innovation meccas, has 55% of Black and Brown students not meeting or partially meeting the critical third grade reading benchmark.
I grew up in the inner city, and there were kids who were failing in schools 56 years ago when I first went to school. And those schools are still lousy today. 56 years later. And you know something about a lousy school? It's not like a bottle of wine, right? Where you say like 87 was like a good year, right? That's not how this thing, I mean, every single year, it's still the same approach, right? One size fits all. If you get it, fine, and if you don't, tough luck. Just tough luck. Why haven't we allowed innovation to happen? Do not tell me we can't do better than this. Look, you go into a place that's failed kids for 50 years, and you say, so what's the plan? And they say, well, we're going to do what we did last year, this year. What kind of business model is that?
Studies have shown that children reading below grade level, coming out of the third grade, are more likely to face myriad challenges: high school dropout, lowered future earning potential, and a higher incarceration rate.
Yes, I would like to point out a research study that me and two colleagues, Kenneth Anderson at Howard and Keith Howard at UCLA, we looked at this issue and we focused specifically on Black boys in middle school and the correlation between their reading achievement and their suspension rates. And what we found, unfortunately, and perhaps unsurprisingly, is that those students who struggled with their reading proficiency were more likely to be suspended from school. So in the 6th grade, if a student were struggling to read, then that student was more likely to be suspended in the 7th grade and subsequent suspensions downrange. We also found the same thing with respect to disabilities. So students who had been diagnosed with disabilities in the 5th grade, that was a significant predictor for suspensions in the 6th grade, and then future suspensions downrange. So this issue obviously is one that's highly problematic, is one that's truly concerning. And for me, as it relates to our students of color, it becomes even more concerning because we see these huge disparities and gaps between reading proficiency and academic achievement. So unfortunately, the research bears true, and this is work that we have to continue to investigate and find solutions so we can ensure that people are becoming better readers, which we hope then will influence their academic achievement.
Tonight, on the Public Square, Cambridge Conversations, we'll tackle the obvious questions regarding how we got here, and more importantly, how we make a positive and impactful change.
My name is Cedric Forte. I'm a junior at Heritage High School, 425.
My name is Jackson Langvort. I'm 18-year-old and I'm a senior at McLean High School. For academic subjects, I'm in Advanced Placement Literature,
English,
Advanced Placement U.S. Government,
Biology,
and Comparative Government,
Art,
Advanced Placement Music Theory,
Health,
Geosystems for Science,
and Algebra.
Men's Chorus,
What's it?
Leadership, and Technical Theater.
When the country cares about something, we'll spend $1 trillion without blinking an eye. When the safety of America is threatened, we will spend any amount of money. The real safety of our nation is preparing its next generation so that they can take our place and be the leaders of the world when it comes to thinking and technology and democracy and all that stuff we care about. I dare say it's a pittance what it would require for us to really begin to solve some of these problems.
So right now, at this moment, I'm gonna introduce Gita and Adrian of the Cambridge Community Foundation. The Cambridge Community Foundation is not only a leader in innovation around issues such as this, but they're a leader in helping us think both smartly and pragmatically. So Gita, I'm gonna turn it over to you.
Thank you, Tony. I'm going to share my screen so that we can get on the, oops. Come on. Okay, all right. Okay, first, good evening, everyone. And thank you to my brother's keeper. I think I'm going to start calling you the community's keeper because I think you're much more than my brother's keeper. You're watching out for all of us and our children. So thank you very much. I think as we heard in the video, education is the big equalizer and it sits within the context of a lot of other issues. So I'm going to share, actually my colleague, Adrian Wallace and I are going to share a presentation with you on the Equity and Innovation Cities report. And the report is in two parts. The first part, which I'm going to focus on, talks about the immense prosperity that Cambridge has seen over the past decade. I think it is really important for us to see that the inequities that you're talking about sit in the midst of amazing prosperity. And then the second part of the conversation that Adrian is going to focus on is through the data on educational outcomes for children, what it means for their future. And she will bring into her own work experiences as a teacher and administrator and a passionate voice for social justice. So with that, just a moment. Okay, there we go. This report, which is a very comprehensive report, compares Cambridge to 25 innovation cities. And by innovation cities, we mean cities that have a high concentration of technology, education, knowledge-based jobs, biotech careers, life sciences, and those kinds of careers that in some ways in our minds is Kendall Square. That prosperity that we saw that Cambridge was actually way ahead of other cities. That prosperity was built over a decade of real amazing growth and innovation that happened in Cambridge from 2009 to 2019. However, we saw that the prosperity that resulted from that growth was not shared equally. And disparities across income and race grew, and they have been exacerbated due to the pandemic. So, talking about the fact that this city, which really sort of has changed over the decade and continues to change, is thriving in the innovation economy. We are #1 in innovation employment. That means about 22% of Cambridge's residents are employed in the innovation workforce. We are #1 in education, which means 81% of Cambridge individuals have a bachelor's degree or higher. And it's important that you remember some of these numbers as we go into the data further. We are #2 in attracting young workers. So as you probably noticed, Cambridge is becoming a place for millennials. And we have, we're the 4th highest median income, and the median income growth in Cambridge has been the fastest. What that has resulted is an immensely resource-rich community where more than 1 in 5 households earn more than 200,000 a year. The combined income of all residents is over 5 billion. The number of jobs that we have in Cambridge, by the way, is more than the number of people who live in Cambridge. And those jobs generate 18 billion in wages. And the collective value of property in Cambridge is over 32 billion. So it's a pretty resource-rich, pretty wealthy city, but there are deep inequities. This report has actually looked at population by segments of 20% by income. So the lowest 20% and the next 20% in income all the way up to the top. And we can see that the first quintile, that the first 20% earn collectively 2.2% of the total income in Cambridge out of that 5 billion. And the top quintile, the top 20% earn 50% of that income. That disparity also hits across race. And the dark blue bar is what the average household, the median household income was in 2010. And the lighter blue is the income in 2018. As you can see, for all Cambridge households, the first 2 bars show that it went up from about 75,000 up to 95,000. If you look at all the other bar comparisons, they did increase, some modestly that were already way up there, and some literally doubling. But if you see the Black community, the increase was very minimal. And the gap between the earnings of a median Black household and all of Cambridge is about 62,000. I think as I mentioned, we are looking at the city by quintiles, and we are trying to understand who makes up these quintiles. Who are the people? What are their, what is their profile? What kind of jobs are they in? So the report looks quite extensively at that. And I'm just going to go very briefly. So the bottom quintile, the first quintile, as incomes up to 30,000, as average incomes of about 13,000. They are mostly in, a lot of single parent households are within this quintile. And they're mostly jobs in the service sector. The second quintile, where incomes of up to 73,000, but average at about 50,000, are mostly immigrants. They come in, they get credentialed very quickly, and actually start to become homeowners. The middle quintile is mostly the millennials, with incomes up to 119, averaging at about 95,000. They're replacing the traditional middle class that we saw in most communities, which is families with children. It's now they're highly mobile. They are in their homes for 2 years or less, and they sort of move on. The fourth quintile is the quintessential innovation workforce, incomes up to 193, averaging at about 150. And then the top quintile is mostly people who work in management and professional positions. Interestingly, this is the quintile where we are seeing a lot of children now. So we're and in some ways, I think that helps explain the disparity that we see in the public schools. So when we stack these quintiles against each other, what it shows is that 32% of the children are in the top 2 quintile and 28% of the children are in the bottom 2 quintile. And then we have a good share of people in the middle who are the millennials. And when you look at them across, so that was around income. When you look at it across race, you see that 80% of the top quintile is white and 52% of the bottom quintile is people of color. In addition, the bottom 2 quintiles, up to 40% of the incomes, almost 40% of all Black Americans are in those 2 quintiles. And interestingly, you know, we had about 9% in the middle quintile, but over the decade, it dropped down to 6%. So we are losing our middle, and they're moving to other communities, you know. So the bottom quintile is also the most cost burdened. So whether they are homeowners or renters, they're paying over 50% of their income towards housing. And if you think about the fact that, you know, incomes of up to 30%, just if you're spending 15,000 of that for housing, on 15,000, you're trying to bring up a family, which is pretty absurd. Homeownership, almost 95% of the top quintile are homeowners, while 63% of the bottom quintiles are renters. Disparities in education, and you remember that slide that I showed up front that showed that 81% of Cambridge residents have a bachelor's degree or higher. And you can see in the top quintile, 62% are masters and above, 28% are bachelors. So that's about 87%, right? And then when you look at the bottom quintile, we only have about 44% or 45% that have a bachelor's degree or higher, which means that with the 3.3% that have some you know, college, we are relegating the rest of the you know, the rest of the community to really low paying jobs. But we also have a level of seniors there. So I think it's important to take that into account. So with that, I think that was sort of giving you the broad overview. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Adrian Wallace, to take us through the data on educational opportunities. So I will move the slides for you, Adrian, and you just tell me when to move to the next.
Perfect. Thanks, Geeta, and thanks to MBK for convening and having us today. We can go to the next slide. The first thing you'll notice is that obviously this slide shows the decline in Cambridge public school enrollment share of the Black population. So in the past 10 years or so, it's gone down about 10% to 23% now. And we can go to the next slide, where we'll see that the educational opportunity gap starts very early, probably demonstrable even earlier than this, but for sure we can see the gap already existing in 3rd grade reading levels. And actually, though these are cohorts, right, it was taken at the same time, we can see that things are not getting better. And that's definitely concern as we see 10th grade English language arts scores are even lower in comparison to other racial groups. On the next slide, you'll see the data points actually aren't just significant in that obviously we want all of our kids reading, learning, and understanding, growing as learners. But just like Dr. Canada said, that really eliminates this opportunity to be prepared for participation in the economy, particularly in Cambridge, where the economy is so based in innovation. Mathematics, literacy are crucially important. So are the humanities that build your understanding and your ability to be creative and innovate. On the next slide, you'll see that students of color, in particular Black students, aren't taking AP at the same rate as other racial groups. And that has a large series of consequences, not only the opportunity to earn college credit and save yourself some money, but also to really prove to yourself that you can accomplish this goal, to have those early reinforcements of your academic prowess and your skills. That matters so much, and that mattered to me as a student. And quite often Black students are denied that first ability to achieve and then to set themselves up for success in college. So their choices are constrained and limited. And on the next slide, you'll see that that doesn't just stop there. That exists throughout college, work, and life. And as Geeta was talking about, then persists into income. Now, education is not the only thing tied to income. You'll see that white high school dropouts still earn more in many cities than Black college graduates, but education is the most significant game changer, right? And we're not taking advantage of that if we are not giving Black students the opportunities to continue to grow, learn, and succeed. So you can see the education breakdown here of the educational attainment by race and ethnicity of adults 25 and older in Cambridge. And just looking at the different colored bars, you can see where most groups have higher attainment than Black groups. And obviously it breaks down a little differently by each section, but the overall takeaway here is that the gaps that we saw start at third grade a couple slides back are just becoming exacerbated worse and worse, and students aren't able to achieve in college, work, and life because they're not getting that solid foundation in their K through 12 education. On the next slide, looping right back to that access point, right? If you don't have access to the innovation economy, then unfortunately we end up in a situation where that prosperity, that shared wealth isn't actually shared. 4.6 of Black adults in Cambridge are employed in the education economy, unacceptable. And that adds to the fact that there's this huge wage gap. I mean, it's one thing to talk about changes and shifts or what you can do or managing on a budget. But if you don't have money, you don't have money. $62,000 is higher than the average American income. And that's just the gap that we're seeing between Black households and other households, with respect to the median income. So that's all discouraging, right? But again, as Dr. Canada said, that's been discouraging for decades, if not longer. That's been discouraging almost since Brown. And we obviously have lots of work to do. So I wanted to share a couple of things that we've seen work as we begin to frame the conversation around what we can do to continue to move things forward. So on the next slide, you'll see some test scores. This is the National Assessment of Educational Progress. It's a uniform test that's issued across all states every year. Select schools take it so that it's not the same students taking it every time. So a really good data measure, and one of the only that allows us to compare between states. So you'll first see the national NAEP scores, where you can see there's a gap obviously between white and Black students. I believe this is 2017 data. So it's a little old, but it's going to reflect patterns, I think, accurately. And then on the other side, you'll see Hawaiian scores. And you'll see that the scores for Black students in Hawaii are 223, whereas the national score for white students is 221. So Hawaii has done some incredible work with respect to their education system and has almost really closed the gap between Black students and white students when you actually compare the outcomes. Why and how? Lots of reasons, but Hawaiian teachers, educators, and researchers who have sort of worked really hard on this will tell you is that they fought really, really hard for cultural competency. Why? Because up until about 10 years ago, you couldn't even teach the Hawaiian language in public schools. And the Hawaiian community pushed back against that hard and long, hard and strong for years until they got cultural competency to be part of teacher education, part of what they do, part of how they're evaluated. And teachers have to reflect on their own skill and will with respect to cultural issues in the classroom. Because they wanted to do that for Hawaiian students, it actually lifted the floor for most students, particularly for Black students in this case. So there's a lot to learn from Hawaii with respect to cultural competency. We already know that students having Black teachers actually helps outcomes, makes them more college ready, makes them more likely to go to college. But having a teacher who's invested in cultural competency in a system that's invested in cultural competency also works. On the next slide, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about a student of mine named Daquan. I've changed his name. This is not his real picture, but I am telling his story with permission. The reason why I'm using a pseudonym is because I promise you, you have seen him play basketball. If you've watched any college basketball in the last 2 years. So Daquan was that student who I would get a call on the walkie when I was a dean of students about to go and find him because he had wandered and found his way into the gym during math or during reading or during science. And it was my job to kind of corral him and get him back to class. And we would chat on the way about this and that. And I really thought I was getting to know him. And I thought, you know, we'd had a reset conversation. I got him in a good place. He was going to stay in class. And then not 10 minutes later, I would get the call again. So that wasn't a moment for me to reflect because what I was doing was not working for Daquan and what we were doing as a school was not working for Daquan. So I pulled up his record in one of our student success meetings and saw, you know, his reading level is at a 3rd grade level. So he's purposely getting himself kicked out of the classroom so he doesn't have to read out loud in front of other students. Completely makes sense. I might do it if I were in that situation too. So that moment we had a restorative circle. We all surrounded Daquan, brought his parents and brought his family and brought a tutoring center and brought his basketball coach. And I apologized to him and I said, I'm not giving you what you need, but I'm going to change that. And I need you to partner with me to fix this problem. And so we had a circle, set some goals for Daquan, got all the adults on the same page as him, set up a plan. I'm happy to talk about the details, but the ultimate outcome was that partnership with a community organization, with the school, with his family, helped him get to a 7th grade reading level by the time he graduated and started 9th grade. He already was a little bit behind then when he went to high school, but because he knew those resources, he was able to come back to us for some additional after-school tutoring. He ended up qualifying to play basketball every year, which earned him a college scholarship. Now, that's not the only way to get to college, but that sort of transition point for Daquan, we're reflecting on understanding that his choices were a skill issue. He didn't have the skill. It wasn't a will issue, and understanding that we as the educators needed to shift our frame and realize that we weren't exercising all of our skills in the interest of Daquan's success helped us make that transformation. So I say that because, you know, each student is going to need something different. And I'm really excited to jump into the conversation about how to make sure all of our students, especially our Black students, get everything that they need. Thank you.
Stop sharing now.
Thank you, Adrian. Thank you, Gita. And thank you, everyone, for being here. I just want to start our conversation off. In our work, I had a great conversation. And I want to thank Ty Belletti. And, you know, Ty has been invaluable, not only to me, but to our team. I want to thank also Seth Williams, Frank Barnes, Richard Carrington, and all of the people who are part of MBK. I think oftentimes the assumption is the Ty and Tony show, and that's a really, really bad assumption. So I want to acknowledge and lift our folks, also our brothers and sisters in arms, folks like, you know, Sarah Reese and Anthony Galluccio, a number of folks who do help us do this great work. But I want to start by giving a big shout out to kind of, she doesn't know this yet, but she's like the unofficial dean of My Brother's Keeper, and that's Carolyn Hunter. And in preparation for tonight's conversation, you know, I was thinking about a number of things that I've read, and I wanted to kind of start briefly before I introduce the panel. Looking at All Deliberate Speed by Professor Charles Ogletree. And in this text, it's a passage. I won't read it right now. I may come to it later. But if you have the text, it's on page 265. And he talks particularly about the courageous work that Caroline, Doc McLaurin, Kathy Reddick, and others had did to kind of push not only the district, but the city to dream differently, to think differently. Tonight is a we conversation. Tonight is not pointing fingers. It's not essentially saying you do this better than us and we do this better than you. You're bad, we're good. MBK, just for all full transparency, our intentions weren't necessarily to jump into this conversation. We saw the need to be a part of this conversation. We're natives of this city, and we're going to be critical because we love her. And so I'm paraphrasing from James Baldwin, so Mayor Reeves doesn't think I'm inappropriately quoting anybody. And so I'm excited about this conversation. but I also want us to think about the folks in which whose shoulders we stand on and who we learn from. And so this conversation is a we conversation. It's not a you're good, I'm bad. And so I want to just know that we come here in love and we come here in peace, but we also have to come here and hopefully we're upset and we want to do some work. All right. So I'm going to introduce our panel. We have a great cross section of panelists who will represent a number of different areas, but more importantly, they bring their unique voices. Tonight, we have the benefit to hear the voices of Vice Mayor Mallon, School Committee Member Aisha Wilson, Councilor Patty Nolan, former Mayor Reeves, business owner, an entrepreneur, and the Executive Director for the Cambridge Caribbean Carnival, Nicola Williams, my friend, my sister, and my partner in Starting Trouble, Dr. Melissa Colon. So we're excited about tonight's conversation. I'm gonna have relatively straightforward questions. I'm gonna try to go for 3 rounds. However, you guys are more than welcome to pepper up the chat box. And after round 2 of questions, if you may, I will take, I can ditch what I have and kind of put the questions that are in the chat in the questions I ask. I want to be also conscientious of the fact that I may ask the question to a particular individual on the panel. That doesn't mean that the chat box needs to be dormant. If you have solutions for this particular matter, please drop them in there, because this is a solution-driven conversation. Okay, is that fair? So we're gonna ask the panelists to take no more than 3.5 minutes. I'll let you know when you have 30 seconds. Just kind of trying to push through this, and I'm gonna make an executive decision. If we gotta stay on a little longer, don't be mad at everyone else, be mad at me. So we just wanna make sure we get through these questions. So we're gonna start with you, Councilor Nolan. Okay. So FY, can you hear me? Can you hear me, Councilor Nolan?
Yes, I can. I'll unmute myself.
Okay. Awesome. So you're a numbers person, so I'm going to throw out a lot of numbers, and I'll repeat them if need be, but I think you know them all. FY18, the school budget, fiscal year 18, was $181 million. In 5 years' time, the fiscal year 22, which you are familiar with, talked about it last night, the proposed budget was $223.7 million, an increase of $42.7 million. According to statistics highlighted in the CCF Equity Innovation Cities report, only 44% of Black third graders read at grade level. 1 in 10 AP test takers in 2019 were Black students. And only 30% of Black and Latinx graduates receive a post-secondary degree in 6 years. If CPS were a Fortune 500 company, how would these stats reflect a good ROI, or return on investment?
In short, they would not. They would reflect a need for a total takeover and for a total reset and a disruption into the model. I mean, I own it, as you all know. I mean, I'm embarrassed to say I was on school committee for a long time, and I lived with exactly what we're seeing. And I am not going to shy away from the fact that I'm embarrassed about the fact that there wasn't more change. I served with Mayor Reeves. And here's what I think can be different to make sure, as we channel Adrian to say there's hope here. I think what we've done wrong is have no accountability with the goals. We set the goals. I can tell you, we set the same goals for the last 15 years in a row. Third grade reading is a marker for every educator. It has been probably for 50 years. The educators would know more. I certainly know it's been since I've started following this 20 years. We had literal goals, and yet we claim, oh, we're setting a new goal. We're going to have third graders at proficiency. And what we don't do is, when we set that goal, have accountability and say, what will we do? What will it take? And I also know, and I'm hoping that the school committee this year will take it on themselves to also get rid of literally putting in writing different expectations for kids. That we literally said, Tony and Ty, anyone heard me about this say last year at the budget meeting, it is shocking that we were literally putting on the table that we expected 80% of white students and only 35% of Black students to be proficient in reading. Cambridge is so small that we can tie accountability to those goals and say literally in 2 years, I used to say 3 years, current kindergartners should be proficient by 3rd grade. Forget it, 2 years, it's only a couple hundred kids. Every single 1st grader now can be proficient. That's on the 3rd grade reading. So on to ROI, I don't think it's there. And I think we know how to do it. Some of what Professor Wallace talked about, which is intensive tutoring has worked in a huge range of schools, from Match in Boston to the entire Dallas school district to Chicago. This is a model we know works. Intensive tutoring, do what it takes. We are flooded with college students in this town who have just graduated who would like to be hired to. I can teach someone to be more effective tutor to work with 2 kids than to deal with a classroom of 30. So I think there are ways we could do it. It has been a lousy return on investment. And I don't know how much time I have, but I would also say one of the other huge thing we do is we don't ever do exactly what you're asking. What has been the return? We spend money, millions on professional development. We don't say, is it effective? We just last night approved more literacy interventionists. That's fine, except for where's the proof that it's effective? And that's really where we should spend the money. I don't know if you want more detail or more numbers.
That's great. We'll be back. No, you give us a couple more numbers. You got to take 30 seconds, take some more numbers. We can take some numbers.
Okay, and I think the huge thing that we don't do in terms of setting our accountable goals is do check-ins and actually say what works and what doesn't work. And I have seen it over and over again that we're also scared to say and point out when we're failing. We do not say, look, this school here, I don't have to point fingers at why, at who, but I want to know why. When we have a school where 7% of kids are passing algebra and another school where 80% are passing, we have to ask why. Again, it's not pointing fingers, saying there's something going on. You know, I always point to let's acknowledge those problems, not to point fingers, but to say, if we don't acknowledge that and fix the problem, and again, we know some of the ways that the personal relationships, another thing I want to highlight that was in Daquan's story, we know that works too. And I don't think, I can tell you, high school students I know who are failing this year did not get a call every week. And yet I know the school committee mandated that. We need to have accountability in the system, and it is not there.
Thank you. I'm going to bring the school committee in. Member Wilson, can I bring you in?
Yes,
okay.
I'm here.
So last night, 6 of your city council colleagues voted in favor for the next stages for the budget. 2 against, and there was one absent vote. Education, let's be clear. Let's be honest. There's education apartheid is real and alive in Cambridge. Proof of said condition can be found in the fiscal year 22 school plan budget, where academic and achievement goals for Black and Brown students around reading, writing, and mathematics are hard to find, to be quite frank. How can district leaders believe and openly state on repeat, as they've done last year, that Black Lives Matter, but choose to vote in favor of a school district plan that keeps the academic and achievement goals for Black students extremely low?
Yeah, thank you for that question, Tony, and thank you for inviting me to this panel. I think what is heartbreaking is the fact that this happens each and every year, and that we need, and for decades, right? Each and every year for decades, this has been the status quo. And at some point, folks need to be really forceful around disrupting that, and really need to be thinking about what are the intentional practices that we now need to implement, and how do we break down the systems that have caused oppression to our students, especially our Black and Brown students, but also to the community. Because as we have looked at these numbers, these young people become adults who then become our neighbors, right? And so when we're thinking about how we are educating our students, we then have to think about who are they going to become when they mature to be, and become adults in our community. So yes, we have a lot of work to do. It is, as Councilor Nolan said, it is embarrassing that we would sit back and kind of allow these systems to continue to oppress. And as a Black woman, I did not vote for this budget, right? Like, I was against it. I said like it wasn't bold enough for me, and I was the only person who voted like that way on the school committee. So we have to be in a position where we're saying, even in this pandemic, not as the pandemic is the deficit as to why we can't make things happen when we weren't making things happen prior to the pandemic, right? So we need to be thinking about what are we doing now? How are we going to be intentional? And how are we going to make sure that our most marginalized students are actually getting their needs met? And I wasn't seeing that in this budget. Were there some great things that we're doing around, family engagement and, other, youth services and things of that sort? Sure. But when we're talking about outcomes for academic measures, we're not seeing that. And that's where we need to make sure that these dollars start to add up and make sense. And when we think about when we're spending $30,000 per pupil and we have these ESSER dollars, all of this funding that's going to be coming in, and we don't even have a plan for how we're going to spend that money, starting with this summer, intentionally, catching our students up, thinking about how we're going to be robust in internship programs, how are we going to really utilize these, stakeholder groups like My Brother's Keeper and the Mayor's Program and all sorts of other groups to actually say, you are now going to be charged with, here's an extra, I don't know, $25,000, $30,000, $50,000 to do some intentional work around catching our young people up, because we have really lost and with time, not lost, learning loss, because they haven't been educated, because educators didn't have the time to do their work because of this global pandemic. So we have to really think about, and I see someone putting in there, we have to think about how we're going to dismantle, break down our systems in order to rebuild and back up. We can't think about how we are going to get different outcomes with doing the same process. It's not. Can
I ask you a quick follow-up, 10 seconds?
Yeah.
Do you think that one of your colleagues on the city council last night said he chose not to vote, Councilor Zondervan, because the budget was racist? What do you say to that?
Yeah, the budget is always, the budget has been racist. It continues to be. It's definitely a budget that doesn't speak to how we are going to help and support our most marginalized. Like these numbers, when we look at data points, when we talk about 44% of our students in third grade are not, are proficient in advanced, and that 56%, like those are bodies, those are individuals. And if we are not going to be doing intentional work to help and support those babies, then yes, this is a racist system. It's a racist budget. If we're not going to say, I'm guaranteeing, that this budget will make sure that each and every one of those young people will be on target for reading, or if not, have the intentional resources to be put in place so that they do get caught up, and that they're not just lingering or falling through the cracks. We have work to do around being the anti-racist district that we claim to be. It takes some work.
That's great. So one of the things, Councilor Mallon, Vice Mayor Mallon, can I bring you in to the conversation? Can the Council and the Vice Mayor hear me?
Yes, and I'm unmuted. Ready to go.
Awesome. So one thing that, and thank you for being here, and thank you for managing your schedule to be with us. So one thing that Aisha mentioned, she mentioned the pandemic. So in 2020, COVID-19 took the world by storm, as we're all aware of. It kept us relegated to our homes in fear of catching the deadly disease and, quite frankly, perishing. Fast forward a year, and vaccines are flying off the shelves and into residents' arms if they so choose. Cambridge residents have been told time and time again to believe the science, believe the data. Well, why do you think that Cambridge leadership refuses to believe the data as it relates to the achievement of Black and Brown students?
I think that's a great question, and thank you to MBK for putting this together and really addressing what we all know is that we have a really stubborn achievement gap that is a solvable problem. And I think, we talked about the budget, everyone talked about the budget we passed last night. I said last year, what I would like to see the school committee do and the school administration do is break that budget down and rebuild it from the bottom up. I want to see it presented in a different way. I want to see us prioritizing different things. I want to see the entire budget process change so that when we as the city council get the budget in front of us, we are able to say, yes, the school committee signed off on this. Yes, the administration has presented this to the community in a way that we all understand that there are going to be the outcomes that we want and we deserve in this district, that our Black and Brown families deserve. We have a persistent and stubborn achievement gap. And I think much like the COVID pandemic, showed us that we had a digital divide, and then a weekend later, we didn't. We solved the digital divide for 500 kids that we knew didn't have internet at home, and we did it over a weekend, right? Where else can we be very, very, very responsive and use these lessons that we learned over the time of COVID, that we can just pivot, we can just be visionary, because it's the pandemic has shown us that we can do it. Where else can we do it? Where else can we close those gaps and close those divides for our kids? Like we did with the digital divide. How do we build on that success?
Can I ask a follow-up question?
Yeah.
Why do you think there was so much, there seemed to be kind of cross-pollination, working with nonprofits. It seemed like folks were really on the ground. And I want to salute you and thank you and lift you for the work in what you do, particularly around food security. Why do you think it was such an urgency to get computers in folks' homes? But, and this is just myself, it didn't seem the same urgency around training and, kind of onboarding families around how to utilize that computer, both in the immediate and the future. Where do you think that gap may have crossed, if there was a gap there?
I agree with you that there's a gap. When we talked about digital equity, it's a three-legged stool, right? You have the hardware, you have the skills, and then you have the access. So the skills need to be built in, and unfortunately, we didn't have that, right? So we have folks that, we wanted to get signed up on Internet Essentials. We wanted to move them from these hotspots to Internet Essentials so that families, the entire family, could have access to the internet. And we've only been able to move off 50 of those 500 students. That's 10% over the last 6 to 7 months, because the skills weren't there and we didn't provide them. We did a survey of families, the family liaisons did a survey of these families to find out why they weren't making that switch. We have the answers, we just didn't provide those skills to do that. So I think, as Councilor Nolan said, there's some accountability here, that people need to be accountable for providing those skills. We can't just, in Cambridge, we can't just say we gave you a laptop and good luck, right? We can't do that for our elderly residents. We can't do that for our students. We need to have that follow through. And I think, that's where, we need to be held accountable as elected officials and our school administration.
Thank you. Thank you. Mayor Reeves, can I bring you in?
Sure.
Okay, so as you're familiar with it, and you may have been at the forefront of helping this manifest, I'm certain you were. We have over 150 publicly traded companies in Cambridge alone, right? Massachusetts, Texas, New York, and California are the 4 leaders in venture capital, as you know. A lot of that venture capital flowing and ebbing through Kendall Square. Given the hiring standards of many companies that make up the innovation sector, Ivy League education and others, high academic achievement, multilingual, community-driven mindsets, can Cambridge say it trains Black students to meet the aforementioned standards? If not, what steps do we need to take to move in that direction to provide our kids to compete in the global economy?
Well, the big answer to the big question is no. The thing I would say, I didn't come tonight to have the same discussion, so I'm going to say some incendiary things. Okay, the first is that school choice in Cambridge for Black and brown kids has been a failure. And the reason it has been a failure is that school choice presumes that the people making the choices have information to make thoughtful choices. And for too many of the Black and brown families, the way we have chosen schools has nothing to do with working the school choice angle that is intended. So for the white middle class and upper middle class parents, school choice has provided a wonderful way for them to say that they have been involved in equity in schools, but get them to the classrooms with, as their children describe it, we go to school with the children of our parents' friends. So they end up in pockets, and there's quite a a grapevine that exists. It tells you, what school you should go to and what school you should not go to. And hence, for us, the purpose of public education was not us, at all us. And what'll tell you that is if you look at the 3rd grade reading competency and math competency, you will see that, if 4/5 of us are not succeeding on an annual basis, how could the system be built for us? It's simply not. So what is a solution? I believe, now here we are sitting in the most innovative square mile in the universe, those of us who are in and around Kendall Square. These Black and brown brains are good at innovation. We have to make the things that are not there ourselves. So much like you guys, MBK last summer, invented a summer experience for people who were not at high school as much as we would want them to be. We have invented in prior years things like the Du Bois Academy, which if it was ever needed, is needed back now. We have the possibility to innovate, to create those programs that promote diligence and agency amongst our students. And that's where the opportunity has been lost. And I think we now have to seize that. There is a fallacy too around the school budget. When it's all said and done, that school budget is about 80% fixed costs between salaries and heating the building. So you're really only talking about 20% of that is what you could be innovating around. But I'm hopeful that with the stimulus money coming from Washington and whatever we get from Governor Baker, there will be a real mindset change of what to do with money to help the people, particularly the students. Because as I guess that was you saying, Aisha, now is the time that the groups that best know these students should be asked, what programs can you create that will support the students? And that's why I love Jeff Canada's work so much, because he really invented the route out for many people in Harlem. And Adrian, I'm new to you, but believe it or not, as brilliant as Jeff Canada is, he is not a doctor. He has he went to Harvard and he has a master's from Harvard Ed School, but he must have 10,000 honorary doctorates, I'm sure of that. But my point is, we will have to, there's a group in New York City that does some organizing around minimum wage and was the first to bring the $15 minimum wage to New York. The name of the organization is Make a Road. And that title really connotes what we must do. And we don't really need to have another circular conversation about what hasn't happened, because this.
Can I ask you a question really quick?
Okay.
Based on, I want to ask this question just to follow up about being bold. What's one bold thing that you would do when you are with either that 20% of those dollars or with those federal funds that come down? Which one bold, I got to get you when you're on your bold night. So I want to take advantage of this.
Well, I really believe that you and I and others should make this Du Bois Academy like thing again. And I really believe that what that was, for those of you who don't know, we had a Saturday Academy that was run by a group of men of color. It wasn't I rarely am with new ideas, so I stole the idea from Northeastern, where they were having a similar academy called the Paul Robeson Academy. And we had a Black fireman, Sandy Francis, who was associated with that. So I grabbed him and I said, we're going to start this here. And we put it at the Cambridge Community Center. It was funded by nobody. We funded it. And people like Doc McLaurin and several police officers and several people from the fire department. These men came every Saturday morning and they cooked a breakfast, and we got our boys from the Fletcher Maynard School. We looked for all the boys who were having adjustment issues. We said, send them to us. And this went on for a number of years, but it really built, we taught science, we had breakfast, science, math, Black history, and then we sat in a circle and talked on the gym floor at the community center. And then we gave them lunch and we went home. And over the years, it built a support network where, you know, these boys would say things like, well, you know, the mayor of Cambridge knows who I am. And it built the agency and some forms of the diligence that can really impact outcomes. So that's what I would do with the money.
I'm in it. So we're game. We're actually cooking up, and we look forward to building on that. Nicole, I want to bring you in. Is that okay?
That's fine. Yes.
Okay. Good to see you. Good to see you. And thank you for joining us. I want to bring you into the money conversation to help us think about the dollars, right? All right. With education having a direct correlation to earned income, how can we, as a city, as a community, justify not raising education standards for Black children? Given that the median household income for Black households in Cambridge is $62,000 less than all other Cambridge households.
So given that the income is less, what is the question?
So like, what the hell do we
Just
do?
clarify.
Yeah, so we have this precipitous gap, and I'll even go a little further. For Blacks in Cambridge, the median household income is $33,000, and the average individual earner is $13,000. Right? Given the numbers, is it safe to say that most Black people cannot afford to pay market rent or even own a home in Cambridge? Right? And so, like, what are these variables? What does it do for a young person who goes into our school, maybe wants to live in our city, and just be thrive in this community? How is he or she set up based on what you read in this report and everything else?
There's a huge roadblock because if the income is not there, and the income does have a correlation to education, so there's a huge road gap. So there are two ways to get wealth, actually three. Through home ownership, through business development, like building a business, or stocks. And given the $33,000 or $13,000, there's not a lot of wealth, and wealth that's being transferred. I mean, the Federal Reserve report many years ago confirmed that what we already know now, that Black Americans have a net worth of $8. So in Cambridge, it's even more stark. And the gap, the $62,000 gap between income, make it really challenging. So what we have to do is to create jobs in a pipeline. If a good chunk of our community are within the Black community between 17 and 25 that came through an education that's substandard, then we've got to think about the now. We've got to think about the future, but the now is how do we get these folks into jobs? So we need to think about some other economies, because Cambridge has three economies, major economies. We've got education, we've got innovation economy in terms of high-tech biotech, but we also have an invisible economy that we don't really talk about here, which is the food economy. We have over 475 restaurants in this city. We have, of which less than 5 Black-owned businesses. We have a lot of talent in terms of food makers in the city. People come here. We also have tourism. That's the third economy. So this invisible economy is an opportunity now that our zoning table of uses have been relaxed, and we now can do cottage food industry within our homes. That might be an opportunity for us to look at the now. How can we get these folks employed, trained, and some jobs? But right now we have a food economy that we don't have an ecosystem that we're supporting in terms of training, certification, entrepreneurial training. The city started some, but people need to know about it. We have kitchens that are not being utilized. We have restaurants that are like vacant now. So now is a moment to actually embrace an economy that kind of hasn't really been supported, but can have a pipeline of real jobs that we can have. Because yes, we need to tap the innovation economy, but you need to have the skill set to be part of that economy. I think that there's some transferable skills that we can utilize and some training for some of these jobs, and not just education. There's the it takes a village, right? So different parts of the village. How do we build this village? We've got to maintain it. We have auto. We have people have to drive cars or repair bicycles. There's a green economy. The federal government is investing in that. How about developing some training around that? We've got to relook at what is the 17 to 25 coming out of, and how do we get them employed, and so that their income can become higher. So let's look at the now, and how do we get those pipelines in place? Because yes, as we're planning and moving towards the future, we've got to deal with the now. The now is that we have to get people jobs. And so we got to train them, we got to employ them, we've got to match them. And we have those same institutions and corporations that have a responsibility as well. They can be part of that solution.
Awesome. Thank you, Melissa. I want to bring you in this conversation. So one thing that we hear about, and I think it's some really good work, and I don't want to be in any way dismissive. We hear a lot about anti-racism. How does Cambridge live up to its promise of being an anti-racist city if we can't admit that low academic achievement for Black students isn't addressed in a radical perspective? We're going to be, be honest, like as Mr. Reeves had told us earlier. But can you be an anti-racist city and not address disparities in the ones in which we've talked about today and that are in the report?
Hi, everyone. I'm Melissa. Thank you, Tony. Thank you, my brother's keeper.
Thank you.
It's so nice to see you, Mayor Reeves. Hi, Ms. Hunter. I'm sorry, I have to say hi to my people. Hi, Sarah. And thank you so much for the researchers who put this work together. I'm gonna try to address your question, Tony, but I have to pause for a second.
Yeah.
And like really contextualize it. And I want to start by saying, I want to do what Dr. Wallace did and kind of say a little bit of the story. And that's like the story of my family, right? That when I read this report in the last couple of days, it is stunning in terms of the graphic design, but it actually made me weep. It is incredibly disturbing. It is sad. I come from I was born in Cambridge Hospital. I grew up in the projects in Lincoln Way, ended up in education. My parents used to work in the factories at Kendall Square. I went to Cambridge Public Schools with a host of amazing Black educators who taught us and mentored us and helped us to make Cambridge better. And then I look at this report, 2010. It is that same year, between 2009 and 2012, where at least 15 children in my family alone were displaced out of Cambridge. Displaced, I use that word purposefully. We could no longer afford to be there. So in the report, in the first chapter, and I'm gonna read something, it says, children are disappearing from innovation cities nationwide, including Cambridge. It's a very passive way of saying Black and brown families are being pushed out of innovation cities, that there's no space for low income and middle class Black and brown families in this innovation cities. Throughout the report, it talks about this new Cambridge. New Cambridge is younger, more highly educated, more mobile, more diverse. Is that like the new Cambridge that Cambridge wants for the future? Because if Cambridge wants this new Cambridge, then it essentially means that we don't want working class, middle class, Black and Latino families, because as the report clearly states, we have an aging Black population and a growing wealthy group that's where the children are. And that is very counter what we see in Black and brown communities across the nation. When you look at demographic profiles, you see Black and brown communities in general have a higher number of children than their white counterparts. Not in Cambridge, not in Cambridge. So we're not an anti-racist city, full stop. We are not an anti-racist city, full stop. We may be working towards it, that may be aspirational, but we're not. And I think that, I come from a Cambridge where we used to talk about the People's Republic of Cambridge. Remember those days? And we used to get made fun of if you grew up in the 90s. Oh, those hippies in Cambridge, that People's Republic, right? Well, it was a time where there were lots of innovation happening and where there was lots of social policy and economic policy that was trying to support a building of a middle class. And unfortunately, most of those folks that, like me, who benefited from those policies and programs are not able to stay in our home anymore. So when we talk about like radical transformative change, I think that we really need to talk about like radical economic, radical social policies that are going to hold social institutions, including private industry, accountable for the demographic changes and the economic, educational, and health trends that we see in the city. And that is very difficult work. So I know that like what I'm saying is kind of grim, but one of my greatest inspiration in terms of my own scholarship and research is Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw, who coined the term of intersectionality and asked us to really think about intersecting systems of power, oppression, and privilege and how they shape our lives. And one of the things that she tells us, that she teaches us, is that you can't fix a problem if we don't name a problem. So what we're seeing here is not, and those are not my words, those are her words, Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw. You cannot fix a problem if you don't name a problem. And what we're seeing here is that despite our aspirational goals, Cambridge continues to have incredible gaps around issues of race, and that if we really want to do something about it, then we have to name it and we have to work on it and we have to hold each other accountable. And I think that takes incredible courage, and it's going to require some radical leadership. I don't know if I've answered your question. I just want to say, wow, this research is like, we should all be
Tony?
Like highlighting it and saying, is this what we want? How does this innovation economy converge with this vision that Cambridge has? Does it? Okay, we've lost a Black population. We're losing it. Okay, that's only 10 years. Look at the numbers. 10 years, look at the 2000 numbers. We're losing about 10%. If I don't want to misquote myself here, but like, if you look at the numbers, when we were in high school, Cambridge was about a third Black. Okay, the high school. Now we're at 20-something%. So what is it going to be 10 years from now? 10?
Nah, we're gonna bring. So Ken, I know. Thank you, and I just want to say thank you. Dr. Cologne, Melissa holds me accountable every day. She helps me with my on-sites, my work at work. We're colleagues, and she motivates me and pushes me. So please continue to speak true. Ken, you want to respond about 30 seconds?
I just wanted to speak to, thank you, Melissa. It's so good to hear you speak the truth. I want to name what our biggest problem is that a lot of resources are directed to the populations that we know best and could serve better, but they don't get to them in the way that they should because the leadership doesn't reflect the diversity of the city. So another way to say that, the Cambridge branch of the NAACP a couple of years ago sponsored a program called Can a Black Man Succeed in Cambridge? And I refer you to YouTube to watch that, starring Tony Clark and a number of Black men from Cambridge who went to the Cambridge Public Schools, went through the Mayor Summer Youth Program, came back to Cambridge after college being very credentialed, all kinds of masters and other higher degrees, and couldn't find a job working for the city or working for a Cambridge-based corporation. And when you see this brain trust of Black and Brown Cambridge that are the panelists there, if I were giving out the money, I would just hand you the money because you know the problem better than anybody else. And that's why you have to be inspired by the work of Jeff Canada, I am, because he was not looking for anybody else to do it. Our problem, we're about to hire a new superintendent. Well, we can't necessarily get a full majority of the school committee to know what the vision is. This is a democracy. We work with the people elect, but we never get to get the money and direct it in the way that we want to. Even when you're the mayor or you're on the school committee and there are 3 Black members, does not equal nirvana to getting the money to the problem. And there's a lot of money, but it does not get spent in the ways that benefit our people. If we can't read, 2/3 of us can't read at grade level by grade 3 or 4, then the money is not going to the right place. And the last thing, I have to tell you this. So I've been around a little while. So we had a commission, the purpose of which was to figure out what one thing the city of Cambridge could do for all of its children. This is through the Kids Council. And it being Cambridge, they couldn't come up with one thing. They had to have 2. One was that every child in their family is going to read at grade level by grade 3. The second was every child is going to have a quality out of school time program. So we implemented the 2 of those. That's the agenda for children. So, sit around year 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I raised my hand, I'm now the mayor. I say, well, where are we on the 3rd grade reading? Well, this is from the school administration. Well, we'll check into that. I'm thinking, well, you've been at this for 4 or 5 years. You should be able to answer this question. Well, it's a long and funny story, but the final answer was, we're sorry to tell you, Mr. Mayor, but there is no general agreement on what the 3rd grade reading level is. This is Cambridge has always had the resources, the attention to detail. That high school has a senior class that is about 400 odd students. Half of them will be white and middle and upper class. The other 200 plus students, we should be able to solve whatever it is they need to get them to success. This is where our failure is.
Speaking to that, I want to actually bring in Vice Mayor Mallon. And you can leave it to Mayor Reeves and Melissa to throw me off. So I just scrapped a note. So we're just going to kind of go off the head. But one of the things that Mayor Reeves had mentioned, Vice Mayor Mallon, something that I think that is very important. We have organizations like Department of Human Service Programs and that's a city agency, obviously. We have our schools. And I thank you for bringing up everything you brought up, Mayor Reeves. But we also have nonprofits, right? We also have all these entities who are working in Cambridge. How the heck do we create and coordinate and get out of the way and be vulnerable and say, look, you do that really well. I do that really well. Let's get this together, right? When we think about, to Mayor Reeves' point, we don't have to find, resources to curb the issue with 3,000 3rd graders. I mean, Patty can help me with this. Councilor Nolan may have like 158 or so, that are maybe in that, that pack of ones that aren't reading proficient. But I guess my question directly to you, Vice Mayor Mallon, is in terms of, because of your work, you've been the architect of the Weekend Backpack Program, education liaison, policymaker, all the things that you've done. How do we create, leveraging all these institutions, but particularly DHSP? I just want to say, you made me think about something, Mayor Reeves, and I'll take the blame, but don't put this on MBK. We're going to work with anyone who wants to work with us. We're going to raise some dollars and find a way to follow the dollars. If the city doesn't want to create an audit of these budgets, we'll figure out a way to support this work, because we need to figure out what that 20% is being used on, Mayor Reeves. We need to figure out how our young people are being supported after school. But Vice Mayor Mallon, how do we get these folks to work together to address these issues, to Mayor Reeves' point, to kind of come to a space where we're happy in 3 years? By 2024, we say, wow, everyone's reading at grade level.
Well, you know that I come at this from a wraparound service standpoint rather than from a direct educational standpoint, right? I think what my work has been prior to the city council, in the mayor's office, and even now, is trying to figure out what are those wraparound services that help our kids succeed and our families succeed, right? You know, I'm glad that, you know, Nicola Williams brought up workforce development, right? I mean, it's about housing, it's about jobs, it's about families' access to security. Housing is the #1 thing that we need to be talking about here. I mean, I'm not the school expert. I will leave that to my colleagues on the school committee side on how to get kids reading at 3rd grade. But we know the biggest indicator of kids' success in schools is making sure that their parents show up, right? That they're involved in their education. And so how do we do that, right? I was just on another meeting. The reason why I was, you know, had to step away for a moment is because we've got an affordable housing building being proposed, right? 50 units, and we've got a neighborhood that is opposed to it. And in that meeting, the builder brought up the report that the Cambridge Community Foundation put together as the foundation of why we need safe, affordable, accessible homes for families. We are losing our Black and Brown and our low-income residents at a rapid pace. I think Dr. Colon said it the best, right? In the last 10 years, we have lost so many families. We need to make sure as policymakers that we are ensuring those wraparound services, access to jobs, workforce development. And speaking of workforce development, you know, you mentioned DHSP and audits, right? The workforce development program at DHSP is undergoing an audit right now. We're trying to figure out where are the places where the city can do a good job? Where are those places outside of the city that is providing that workforce development that's doing a better job? And how do we support them in that way? So it is about audit. It is about really taking a look at what we're providing our residents and whether or not it's working. And if there's a nonprofit that's doing it better, how do we support that? So, you know, for me, it's really about that out of school time that I've been focused on, and my work has really been primarily focused on. And I'm, you know, that's a space that I feel really, really comfortable in. But we, in terms of policy, it's really, for me, it's about housing, workforce development, access to cash, right? We just announced that we, you know, with the Cambridge Community Foundation, the mayor, and a number of other stakeholders, we're putting together a pilot program of a universal basic income, right? That is to take the pressure off of a lot of families. And we really need to think about how we're being creative with those funding and making sure that our families are supported.
Awesome.
Tony, can I say something, Tony?
Yes, please.
You know, you brought up this issue about looking at how we are spending the 20%. You know, I look at the entire city's budget. It is huge. And then I look at where are we investing? We are investing in buildings. We are investing in sidewalks. We're investing in parks. We are not investing in our children. We are not investing in people. And I think there's something I feel that we really need to get involved, not in just the school department budget, but the city's budget process. And I think, you know, and I think we need to follow the money. And I think it has to be accountability. Melissa, I am so glad you said everything you said, because we tried very hard in this report to be very neutral, because we wanted it to be a baseline report so that everyone could come to it. But honestly, when the reason we did a State of Black Cambridge was when we looked at the data, it seared my soul, honestly, to say, how can this kind of injustice happen in a city with this kind of wealth? It is wrong. And I do think that we have to look at how the money is spent, what it is used for, and push for change. You know, the anti-aid amendment, for instance, that the city follows, there is no other city in Massachusetts that is diligently following that. We are not investing in our nonprofits. You know, when a program has to be developed, the city ends up developing a program, even if there is a strong private nonprofit program happening. And I think we have to push our leadership on that change. I think this is a very, very strong moment with a new superintendent, elections. I really hope that we will do, as Dr. Caroline Hunter said yesterday, organize the community and hold a forum and hold that accountability and build benchmarks. You know, figuring out at the end of the year whether we succeeded or not is not the way. We need to figure out, did we get to where we were supposed to get to at different points in the, I'm sorry, I'm very passionate and angry.
No, I think
it makes me so mad.
I think you raised a number of really important points, and I think one in which made me kind of think about how do can I bring Patty in? Patty? Because when Gita was speaking, it made me think particularly about, if you haven't read it, it's a phenomenal book, talks a little bit about Cambridge by Bob Moses. It's called Radical Equations. Civil rights from Mississippi to the Algebra Project. But there's a particular portion in the book where obviously he talks about his children, the relationship with King School, obviously math, and a number of things. But he essentially, as a part of the portion of the book, is essentially, we need to expand the day in a really, really intentional way. And so, Patty, considering we don't have, as Mayor Reeves had mentioned, hundreds of thousands of young people that may be in need, but everyone's in need, right? How can we create a system where we're bold enough to say something like, let's have, I'm going to channel Frank Barnes for a second, year-round schooling for certain folks who want to opt in, year-round schooling. And obviously be creative around how we work with the institutions of higher education, because maybe there are graduate students who want to teach in the summers. Maybe there are graduate students who want to teach during the breaks, and we can kind of, create more broker-better relations with. But how can we reimagine around a longer school year, a more creative school year for those folks who may need it or want it?
So a few things. I have proposed that many times, although I will say the research shows that it's not necessarily, that doesn't give it, the year-round schooling doesn't necessarily give you what you want. Just like a longer school day, it's only effective if you're already using the school day well. If you just keep doing what you're doing for another hour, it is not going to get you what you want. I also really want to take issue. It is not 20%. We keep being told that budget, maybe 50% is fixed because of set teacher classroom sizes. It's all people, but we can reallocate, we can redirect, we can have tutoring, we can have 2 teachers in every classroom. It is not a fixed budget. We're all told that, and it is just wrong. If you took that budget, there's a lot of ways that it could be redirected and reallocated, and we should be doing it. And I think that you talk about, as you know, Tony, I think you've heard me, it should be embarrassing to us all that we just put a mural up at the fabulous and amazing Starlight Square to Bob and Janet Moses. And in 1992, the school committee started asking for 8th grade algebra for all kids, regardless of any of your backgrounds. And you know what? The last time I checked, I don't think there's current information. Now, it was 14% of our kids who were passing algebra in 8th grade. And you know what it is from St. Peter's and BB&N and all the other schools coming into our district from 8th grade? It is closer to 70%. Like, how is that possible? My head is exploding with the idea that we don't truly believe all kids can do it. And it gets back to, the growth mindset, we talk that talk and we do not walk the walk, and we have totally different expectations for people. And last night, I'm just going to put it out there, any person, administrator or educator, who is not willing to say in 2 years, we're getting every single kid to third grade proficiency in reading, as you said, it's only 160 kids, they should not be in this district. We should not want them to be here. And that goes for, if we can't get every current sixth grader to finish successfully algebra by 8th grade, they should not be in the district. We can do it. It's just whatever it takes. Last night, when I asked why the 5 high school books that were being promoted for summer reading, where you get 1 of 5 books, why the reading levels of those texts were 3rd grade, 4th grade, 5th grade, and 7th grade. And the answer was, well, the text complexity is such that it's a subject matter that's appropriate for high school. That may be true. I cannot believe that we can't find culturally appropriate books at a reading level that is in 9th to 12th grade. We are giving a senior in high school the option of a graphic novel at a 3rd grade reading level and saying, this is a book you have to read for the summer. If that is not the epitome of low expectations and telling kids we don't expect much of you, we claim we expect them to do more, and then we do stuff like that. We just have to have this revolution and disruptive change to say, we are not taking it anymore. As I told you, Tony, I am tired of participation trophies. We set up a ton of great stuff that look good, and we need to, I don't even care how you measure it. What I almost care is take that whole budget and say, what we want to do, as the vice mayor also said, we need to get to the point where the budget says, here's where we stand, here's what we're going to do, here's how it's going to get us. And we haven't done that. And again, we know some of it, it's intensive tutoring. We also know programmatic change. I have never heard most people call out the fact that the Tobin Montessori off the charts, 95th percentile for every subgroup you can imagine in English and math. And yes, it's based on MCAS, which is not the only measure, but then show me some other measures. And we're not saying we need to start at least a 2nd Montessori, if not a 3rd Montessori. You know, we have bilingual immersion programs that are off the charts and bring kids in. And we know that bilingual learning is something that's good for the brain and good for so many other things, not to mention you're not just learning cultural competency, you're actually learning to respect another language and another culture. Why don't we could be the first district in the state to have maybe every single school should be a bilingual immersion school. I mean, we could do such creative things within our current budget. We don't even have to raise taxes, but what we're not doing is sending the message that we actually believe we can do it. And you're right, Mayor Reeves, I heard it too. And I will say a couple times, even I tried to get a vote to say we have to change our summer reading, and I couldn't get 4 votes on school committee. I think this school committee is ready for that disruptive change, and that would not happen again. And I'm expecting them to take up the charge. I don't know if that's
awesome.
Did I even answer your question?
Yeah, it was great. It's all right. I'm asking a couple questions, and I'm gonna bring it out. I'm gonna bring it to the forefront for everybody. Yes.
Tony, can I just say 1 minute?
I was gonna ask you a question first. But yes,
okay,
make
go
your
ahead.
point. I'll ask you a question.
Thank you. Sorry, the screen just blacked out. Thank you, Councilor Nolan. Thank you. That was really thought provoking. And
thank you,
Geeta and Adrian. I just wanted to say one quick thing that, when I mentioned their report is because it's important, right? Like that data, it may be painful to read, but I think that's part of the charge of public research, that it is meant to provoke. It's meant to raise questions. So I just want to say how much I appreciate the research that you have put forth. And second, in terms of the budget, yes, it's important to keep our eyes on the budget, but I think we need to also look at the work that has come from Black and Brown and Indigenous traditions, that it's not just about like universal policies or universal programs, but really like more targeted approaches. Cambridge has so many amazing programs, right? Someone in the chat talked about giving every child a bag of books, all the literacy programs. You go to these events, I go to these events. Look around, look who's participating. Look at
me and my kids, it's not.
Okay, so what we need is a more targeted approach. That's what the W.E.B. Du Bois Academy was, a target approach. That's what Night Stop was, a targeted approach. That's what was happening at the youth centers in the 90s and the early 2000s, targeted approaches. So I think we do have the budget to do those things, but I caution us saying that we need universal programs. We don't. What we need is more targeted approaches.
Yes.
You know what?
You need universal pre-K though.
You got 30 seconds because you got 30 seconds. I want to go to Aisha. I want her to speak to that targeted approach. 30 seconds, Mayor Reeves.
I was just gonna say, we do need universal pre-K for public schools.
Okay, that's where we're going.
Okay.
Sure. Yes, yes, of course, yes.
And the NAACP led on that, and we've been talking about this since 2013. We are now in 2021, and we are not a step closer to universal pre-K in Cambridge. It's disgraceful. Now President Biden is going to fund it nationally. Maybe now we can have it.
Let's speak to that. I want to kind of go to targeted approaches, and I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge the work and the guidance that Carolyn Hunter has provided our group. And I just want to Aisha, can I bring you in?
Yes, definitely.
I want to just bring you into a couple of things. And we're going to go for a little bit more, if you don't mind. If the panelists could stay on, City View will be mad at me, but it's all right. We'll just go on for a little more. But I just want to read off a couple of things. And this, I want to give credit to Carolyn Hunter for putting this together for us. And so she helped us put together a couple of things. And I just want to read them off. And she put together a comprehensive binder. And I want to be clear about this binder. One thing in which she did for our group, in which she said, utilize it and help people. And my brothers and sisters on our board, particularly sister, they will tell you, we went to a meeting with the district, the superintendent, the deputy superintendent, the mayor, city manager, and one of the council members. We offered them a wealth of information in which Ms. Hunter offered us over 40 years of reports and studies that have targeted how to, if not address the issue which we're discussing now, how to be curious about it. We left with no one asking to Xerox a page of this, no one asking to peruse it, no one asking to engage it. And part of this idea, and I'm going to go on a little bit of a tirade, for a second, is that we lack a level of curiosity in our city. We lack a level of vulnerability in our city. We lack a level of saying, I don't know the answer to that. I watch meetings over, and I'm going to you now, school committee member Wilson. I watch meetings over and over and over again, and folks rarely say what they do wrong. They really say, and I'm saying folks in leadership, they struggle, but I want to do a couple of things. In this particular binder, Professor Hunter's provided us with a letter in 1987 to Dr. Peterkin regarding the achievement gap. She has provided us information in 1985 regarding the disparities in AP. She's provided us with articles from the Boston Globe in 1987, one titled by Paul Hirschison, Few Minorities in Advanced Classes. A Cambridge Chronicle article, Report of Concern. I say this to say is in terms of this is not a new conversation as we know, but where is the curiosity and willingness to say, look, we want to change the narrative. We don't want to be the butt of anyone's proverbial jokes. So I ask of you, how curious and vulnerable will you be moving forward and in your next term to bring in the village to help you solve these issues?
Wow, thank you so much for that question. And what I have to say, hands down, is I've asked you for that book. I've asked you to breeze through that book.
And yes,
ask again.
Right.
So
you weren't in that meeting, but you. Yes,
so
you can always.
But offline, we are going to get to that conversation.
Well, there's a prerequisite. You gotta, because the book is so valuable, you gotta come by and hang out.
That's it. Let's do it. We can have a hanging session, and I just want to cruise and all right. But to the point of what you're saying is, as we know, and thank you, Ms. Hunter, for your expertise in sharing of your knowledge in the work that you have you know, really gathered over your decades of service to this city, your commitment to this city. And that's real. And that's something that we need to always look at as legacy foundational information that's going to help us think about how we move things forward, right? Because again, here we are in 2021, you know, and as you're reflecting on articles from 1987, and I'm sure nothing has changed, right? So how do we expect that in 2030 for the needle to be moved if we're not going to be intentional today about the challenges we know that are happening yesterday, right? How are we going to be intentional in thinking about what are the interventions? What are the strategies? What is the solutions? And how are we going to be a solution focused city versus like this Band-Aid kind of city? I think that's just kind of where we are. And when there's a little challenge, we throw a Band-Aid on that. And we somehow think that that Band-Aid is going to last forever. And when we then have to revisit next year or a couple years later, you know, we just had a conversation in the Tuesday's meeting about the misogyny and sexual harassment policy that Mayor Simmons and others back in 2017 put forward. We were revisiting that in 2021 and nothing has changed. This is problematic in the city when motions get put out and the accountability and the accountability and transparency around where we are with these things are just not being real. We need to be able to say, we messed up. That got overlooked. You know, now we could fix it. Now we will be intentional in what our next steps are going to be about that. But again, what does that take? That takes vision. That takes a bold person. That takes leadership. And that is what we don't have in this city. Be an accountable city. We need to be able to make sure that our teacher evaluations, our principal evaluations are being done each and every single year. And that if it's not measuring up, that there are corrective action plans that then go into play. How is that? That's simple. For any organization, you're going to be evaluating your staff down the board, up and down that board. And these things are not happening in the city. And when we're learning about this, we don't learn it until after the fact. But yet now we have a person who's in tenured because we provided that to them. And now what are we supposed to do?
Let me ask another quick question. I'm gonna bring you in, Melissa, and I'm gonna ask a couple just quick questions. As we're listening tonight, are we dealing with a civil rights issue or a human rights issue?
Is that a question for me, T?
Dr. Colon. Did we lose her?
Maybe possibly, but if I say, I mean, what we are dealing with, you know, when we think about human rights and civil rights, I think they both go a little hand in hand.
Awesome.
At the end of the day, a possible, education in a city like Cambridge, where we are spending $30,000 per pupil, it is human right that we are educating our students and educating them at the highest and best capacity that we know that we should be doing that. And that should not look different from a little Black boy to a little white boy, a little Black girl to a little Latinx girl, right? It should be across the board looking, you know, how we think about equity and access. That's what it should be. It is
awesome.
So it is the human rights, but in terms of the civil rights, because at the end of the day, these are young people who are going to then be advocates and our future leaders and so on and so forth. How are we empowering them? How are we giving them the tools, and how are we wrapping services around the rest of the community, our stakeholders, our parents,
got it,
to provide those resources as well. So I would say it's definitely both.
Awesome. I'm going to ask a couple quick questions and then we're going to close out. I want to start with you, Vice Mayor Mallon. Do you believe our city is ready to make a bold statement that essentially we can get every kid reading at level at 3rd grade, and we can have every kid entering 9th grade at least prepared to take algebra?
Yes.
Yes. Awesome. Member Wilson, I want to bring you in one more time really quick, maybe a minute. Do you believe Cambridge has an achievement gap or an opportunity gap? And discuss why, or both.
Yes, that's a wonderful question. And I always say that it's a little bit of both, because at the end of the day, it's the way the opportunities get actually allocated to our young people. Just because we are a resource-rich city and there are opportunities galore in this city does not mean that the access to them are achievable and attainable to each and every one, especially those who need it. So yes, there is a huge opportunity gap. And within the achievement gap, it shows in our numbers.
Awesome.
The numbers and how we're measuring them is through the MCAS, which is a racist test, and we need to think about how we are assessing our kids and making sure that we're assessing them on holistic measures, not just a measure. And I also want to just plug, if it's okay, that this is an election year. It is important to be thinking about who are our leaders, who are we electing into the seats for our next terms. I look forward to, and I'm thankful to you, Tony, for speaking this into existence of the next term. You know, like I look forward to an opportunity to serve the city again and serve along some of my colleagues, right? But I want to be real. In order to be a bold city that's going to really create some change, especially on the educational front, we need to make sure that our voices and our visions do align. And we need to think about what does race and equity and access look like, especially for our most vulnerable kids. And as we're bringing in a new superintendent, we know that we have to support this Black woman to actually be successful. And that's going to take all of us as a community to do that, not in a silo.
Awesome. Councilor Nolan, one thing that I found fascinating, and I won't talk about too much commentary, but I found fascinating during the superintendent interviews, there was a question around principal evaluation. And it seemed that really little clarity on what it was. So I'm just curious, how could CPS have parents, families, and students participate in an evaluation of principals? Just if we were kind of to dream that, how can we put those stakeholders together to evaluate our principals?
Well, I'm pretty sure, since principals, due to the Education Reform Law of 1993, are not union employees and are contracted employees, hopefully Dr. Colon or anyone else who knows will correct me. I believe we could set the evaluation any way we want, and we should have a 360 evaluation. We should have student, we can have parents, we can have teachers help evaluate principals. I will say, just to remind you, one of the most important votes I took when I voted not to renew a superintendent contract, it was because the state found 75% of principals had not been evaluated for 5 years in a row, and 75% of the top administration in the district. And I was the only no vote on that contract. So talk about accountability. We have to hold ourselves accountable too. And for me, that was about holding that superintendent accountable. To answer your question, that now happens, right? Now they get evaluated, but there's no legal reason why we can't and we shouldn't have a full 360. So people who report to the principal and reach out to the community, have parents, but also nonprofit partners. If Breakthrough or Cambridge School Volunteers or Tutoring Plus or Workforce has kids in your school, they should at least have some way to have input into the evaluation. And honestly, it makes them better. If I'm principal, I should want to know how it is that I'm doing from the perspective of everybody in the community, because my goal, I do believe principals want to be effective. How can they know if they're not getting honest feedback?
Awesome. Nicola.
Yes, I'm ready.
Thank you. What can we do to leverage our relationships with our university partners? Or how do we even create partnerships with our universities for the benefit of our young people?
A couple of ways, actually. I'm mentoring 4 high school students right now, and 2 from one of our charter schools and 2 from BB&N. And the gaps is so wide, even just the interviewing process. From the charter school, the young kids, some people, doesn't have a resume. They didn't have a, and this is, for an internship program, or didn't read the job description. And, I tried hard. I worked with them. I'm like, come on, you want the job, right? And so what I'm saying is that we have a rich environment here in Cambridge. And I think, when I first moved to the Boston area, Cambridge, I became a tutor. That's how I got connected to the community. I worked for Jobs for Youth as volunteering my time. so that not only within universities, but recent graduates, they want to give back. It's a good way to connect with the community, but we need to let our universities know what we need and how they can tap in. For example, the summer youth job program should be year round. It should be a year-round program. It should be a fellowship. It should be paid. It should include workshops. Aisha and I had a conversation this morning about how can we buffer that program so that we can have our students understand, not only get a resume, but also, have you done the resume, or dress for success. Have a section. College students want to give, they want to connect in their local community, but they need pipelines. They need that encouragement. They need a way to connect. And I think our nonprofits are great resources and great ways to make those connections, like MBK, like the NAACP, like Bring Back the Du Bois Institute, so that we can leverage those college students. They need a way to tap in and how to tap in, and so that our students can get the guidance, the mentorship that they need. The year-round programming is what's needed. It takes a village. It can't just all be in the schools. It has to be outside the schools, from the womb to 6 years old, and from in the summers, etc. And it's great to play basketball and get paid for it. I think it's important, but put some workshops in there and make sure that you understand what a resume looks like. Make sure you understand how to interview. Make sure, and this is again, developing a pipeline for success. And we have it all here. We just need to make the connections, need to coordinate. And I also think that should be much more cross-fertilization between the city council and the school committee. Much more cross-fertilization in terms of programming, so that because we're in this together, and we have to work together to make it happen.
Thank you. Mayor Reeves, we'll bring you in 90 seconds in terms of, Nicola had mentioned, bringing kind of cross-pollination. With that being said, I'm certain you have the ear. Yeah. Can you give an elevated speech to me? What would you say to Dr. Greer day one to help support her throughout her first year, or her year, her year contract? What are some things?
I would tell her I want to be part of the silent supporters of her vision and mission as she leads us and to future. I'm very impressed by her. And the NAACP had her as a speaker for our Martin Luther King event in February. And she is very focused on the fact that there is so much learning loss in this last year plus, that every school system should have blueprints that are already in place for what people ought to be doing this summer. And she was absolutely inspiring from the detail that she has been truly deeply thinking about it. So I'm hopeful that the school committee will hurry and get her contract signed so we can talk to her.
Awesome.
And another thing we didn't say here, but we also will be looking for a new city manager. If in this next election, the people can vote a council majority that all wants to go in the same direction, that can get us a great city manager that wants to work with us in a progressive agenda, and similarly for the new superintendent, maybe we can make some progress. But things as they stand in this moment, the stars are not aligned for the progress that we need.
Awesome, thank you. Dr. Colon, are you back? Can you hear me?
I'm here.
Okay, so you're gonna close us out. Before Dr. Colon asked the question, I just want to kind of give some information to the group. So there are two, I want to kind of give you an update. This will be aired on Monday, the 24th at 3 p.m., Wednesday, the 26th at 8 p.m., Friday, the 28th at 8 p.m., Sunday at 3 p.m. We'll put this on our website on the 30th, and on Monday, the 31st at 5 p.m. It's all through City View. And I want to thank everyone who came on tonight. I'm going to ask, Dr. Colon to close us out with my last question, and then we will have a video. And then I wanted to say thank you to the community, the Cambridge Community Foundation, for pushing us to think creatively, for pushing us to be vulnerable, and for pushing us to move from good to great. Gita, your leadership is invaluable. We thank you. I thank you. Lori Landa, your leadership is invaluable. Thank you for starting this conversation yesterday. This is brilliant that you guys are continuing to move this conversation and pushing folks like my brother and I, Ty, to continue to think creatively and more pragmatically. And I also want to shout out a lot of the great work that's happening on this line from folks like Kenny with Friday Night Hype. I'm seeing some other folks, Kari, and the work in which they're doing with the Agenda for Children. And if there are other organizations, please put your information in the chat. As I said before, this is a week conversation, all hands on deck. And part of having all hands on deck, I want to be conscientious of, is that we have to blow things up. We have to be abolitionists. Some things just got to get rid of. And so, Dr. Colon, how do we blow this up and start over, or what do we need to blow up? Take us through that, help us dream big, help us start some good trouble. I wanted to say thank you to everyone who tuned on. I think it's more apropos to the last voice that you hear is Dr. Colon's. As I said, after Dr. Colon, Kelvin and Danielle, who don't get a lot of credit from City View, will cue up a video. I want to thank them for their great work. They are the producers with myself and Ty of this particular show. And they came to us and said, dream big, push the city. And so I want to just thank them for their work. So how do we blow this up? How do we be abolitionists? Not afraid of this word. Dr.
Wow,
Colon.
that's a big question. And I love that you said that it's we, because the work of abolition on all fronts has never happened with one or two people or one institution. It's happened with communities coming together and pushing for social change on all fronts. I also want to thank the research team because it was very thought-provoking, and I want to keep our eyes on this idea of the children are disappearing. The children are not disappearing. We are being pushed out. We are being displaced. And therefore, Cambridge of the future needs radical housing policies that keep low-income, middle-class families. That means accountability. We have to ask ourselves, is the innovation economy worth changing our city? Is the change worth it? What will the Cambridge of the future look like? I want to see a complete overhaul of the curriculum. So it's not just about cultural inclusivity. It's not just about tolerance, but it's really about culturally sustaining pedagogies. That is the Hawaiian model, where they looked inside and they said, we know what we need to do for our children. And guess what? It helped all the kids succeed. So we really need to rethink our curriculum. And also we need to rethink economic policies across the board. Of course, we need universal early education. We also need universal healthcare. We also need universal access to higher education. We also need high quality elder services for our Black and Brown elders in Cambridge, which is which there is a concentration of POCs there. And I say all these things because if there is a place that can reimagine itself and can do it, it is Cambridge. It is Cambridge. We have the intellectual, social, and cultural capital to do it. You know, disruption is also an opportunity. So I see the changes that are going to come, the thinking big, as really an opportunity to start anew, to think about our values, and to continue to make Cambridge a great place to live, to thrive, to be happy, and to be healthy.
Awesome. Thank you. As I mentioned previously, we will have a clip to close us out. And I also want to acknowledge that we'll bring this conversation back next month. The only difference is we're going to take the questions from the chat, and that's going to drive the discussion. So thank you, good night, and please tune into the last video.
In my 10th grade literature class, my students analyzed the work of classic Greek philosophers in order to understand the foundation of Western thought and the principles of the English language. In the back left-hand corner of the class sits Kevin, a 15-year-old boy with academic apathy embroidered on his eyelids and a stardust disposition that could be seen all the way from the other side of this 1960s kaleidoscope of a hallway. Keeps his head face down on his desk because with no father, he says he's never known a man in this world worth looking up to. But I try to engage him anyway. I try to connect this excerpt from a 1,000-year-old text to the world he wakes up to every morning, and some days I'm more successful than others. But today, Kevin comes up to me after class and says, "Mr. Smith, why do we even read this stuff anyway?" So I tell him, Kevin, Socrates was killed for political dissension. This world wants to see you killed by giving a suspension. His time was more similar to yours than you think, but now Athenian and Spartan militias manifest themselves in bandanas and brown skins. So I beg of you, don't become part of a war in which you were never meant to fight. Listen, Aristotle says we are what we repeatedly do. Excellence, therefore, is not an act, but a habit. So you better act like you have it, because the only difference between you and these Greek philosophers is the scraggly beard, the wrinkly skin, and that silly-looking robe. But your ideas are no less profound, your insights no less enlightening, your values no less important. There are brilliant words bubbling from the ballpoint tip of your pen if you would just take off the cap. But what do I know? I'm just a 25-year-old public school teacher who continuously questions everything he's ever known. We have skin of a common complexion, but a lifetime of experiences more dissimilar than the solar system. So who am I to come into this classroom and tell you what to do? A quarter lifetime worth of missteps has taught me that my savior complex is something I need to shed from my skin. So trust, I'm not trying to save you because I'm still trying to save myself. Honestly, how can I teach him to believe in Plato when gentrification is taught to me as nothing more than Play-Doh, something to be moved and molded at will by those doing the sculpting? So there's only one thing left to do. Become the sculptor and not the sculpted. Become the statistician and not the statistic. Kevin, I'm not perfect. I'm just a teacher trying to get you to understand all that you are already capable of doing. So I have no choice but to make sure you understand how to dissect this text, because nobody's pity is going to get you into college. We will work until concepts like the prison industrial complex and the achievement gap are archived into the library of America's imperfections. You will learn to read critically, write consciously, speak clearly, because that is the only way this world will ever listen to what you have to say. So let's make this world see you in more than just Jordans and prisons. Let's flip that and let them see you with college admissions. Show them you are more than just a jumble of brown-faced quantitative data on charts and spreadsheets. Show them there is an Aristotle awaiting to be awakened in your chest. Show them there is a Plato pumping potential through your veins. Show them there is a Socrates ready to spring forth from your throat. Your Mount Olympus is standing right in front of your face. So now it's time to pick up your head and start climbing.